I am. When I was in the middle of the shoot, they asked me to come into the room. Oh my gosh. And when you get into a layoff room, I'm sure people know this, like, you know what's about to happen. But I had someone in HR I've never spoken to, and then my manager next to us, they ended up telling me they didn't have any good reason. They didn't, like, they were saying, we're just getting started on these things. And I felt so betrayed. I felt like absolutely just like worthless. Like I clearly wasn't as good as I thought I was supposed to be. And it was, I didn't cry yet, which I feel pretty strong about, but my manager at the time wanted a hug. Like, oh, like, I feel so bad. Will you hug me? And I remember just
Thank you.
like wanting so badly to like if I didn't have to filter myself, I'd say so much right now. And it was, I will say the layoff experience was atrocious. And I know now even more that it wasn't good.
Welcome back to Secrets of a Corporate Game. So many people are trying to navigate a corporate world that is laden with secrets, cleverly hidden and unspoken rules to a game that most employees don't even know they're playing. On this podcast, we try to give you a peek behind the curtain and unveil some of those secrets with tips and tricks that you can apply today to start taking control of your career and progress up the ladder faster. Excited today because we are going to be talking about social media, both within and outside of the corporate world, as well as corporate experiences, building personal branding, understanding how to be a leader. We're going to talk on a lot of different things with our wonderful guest today, Jamie Ratterman. She is a holistic business coach. She specializes in both personal and business branding, as well as marketing, and helps a lot of business owners hit their first six-figure years. She likes to combine that health coaching aspect with her 10 years of experience in the corporate marketing space and adds value to her clients globally. So welcome, Jamie. It's awesome to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to chat.
It's going to be great. So I'd love to kind of start off with our audience, telling them a little bit about your corporate background, right? You have since moved into the entrepreneurial space, but why don't you talk about what your corporate experience was like and kind of what you did?
I'm going to go back to my roots. It's kind of fun to talk about this stuff. So I'm originally from the Midwest, but I currently live in New York City. I had these like big old dreams of being like a magazine editor when I came here. And then I ended up landing myself as a social media marketer in like bigger brands. I worked for big travel brands that you know of, fashion brands here, a lot of those things for about 7 years. Of those 7 years, 5 of them I was the head of social media for a large travel brand, and it was absolutely one of the most interesting experiences, I should say. But I think part of at least my corporate experience had a lot to do with like I learned a lot. I'm not going to ever say I learned a ton, but I did not play the politics great when I was in that experience. I worked a ton. I was like best friends with the janitor some nights where he's like, you should go home. And I'm like, yeah, I probably should. I was like working the midnight oil a little bit. But ultimately I finished my corporate experience wanting to leave, but was laid off in the middle of a holiday photo shoot that I had orchestrated for the company. Like I was in the middle of it. They asked for a meeting, and in the middle of like months of work, they said they had to downsize, and they laid me off. So it was like a very humbling experience, which I'm sure we'll get into. But I would say with corporate, there was a lot of things that I learned, but whenever I left, I made the transition thinking about, do I want to walk back into this like toxic environment where I'm overworked? I want more help. I want more pay. And my skills are reputable elsewhere. So I actually ended up going on a couple of interviews quite soon after being laid off. But I kept going like, I'm walking back into the same environment where they're going to ask me what's the value of social media, which I swear is like gotta like sends chills up my spine, but when people talk to me about it. And I ended up starting a business consulting and moved into coaching, and thankfully was able to hit my corporate income and then triple it within the next couple of years, absolutely helping people who valued social, and how that turned into a business and how I get to help people now.
That's amazing. And there's like so many things you touched on that I want to like double click and learn more about. I mean, first off, I want to apologize on behalf of your company, not that they asked me to, because like what a horrible way to let somebody go with like awful timing and very low EQ. So I'm sure that was like incredibly unfortunate. We'll definitely talk some more about that. But I also think it's a good point of what you bring up, because I think social media is a unique space. And companies don't
Absolutely.
always give it the value that it deserves. And some like recent examples I always like to touch on is like the Wendy's clapbacks.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
their social media person was not compensated fairly for like the sheer amount of buzz
Oh,
that
absolutely.
drove, or like the Duolingo social media team, like really spiked in 2021. They did some really great things. So I think it's interesting when you see these brands who really do find a place to play in social media. They do really, really well. And yet I hear so often that it's undervalued. So I'd love to hear your take on that quickly with social media, specifically within the corporate world, within that marketing space. How did you feel like it was valued or undervalued? Like, what did those conversations go like with your leadership?
I mean, I feel like the general consensus of anyone who questions the value of social media are people who think posting is anybody can post. Usually, the people that undervalue social media is the ones who are thinking that any post is the same as another. Like understanding that sometimes, like, yeah, you can post anything you want on Twitter, you can post anything you want on Instagram, but the ones that actually resonate, actually like represent a brand, build trust, want to keep people around, comes with like a lot of psychology and a lot of creativity. So when it came down to it, I would be the person who was trying to talk about, like, is this what we want to represent as a brand, versus somebody who's like, let's just spray every platform with 5 posts a day that make no sense towards our sales goals and have nothing to go on with our projects. And I felt that I ended up being the person that was just helping them realize that a brand has like an emotion, has a meaning to people. So with something like Wendy's, and even Duolingo for that matter, is that like in the past, like brands never had quote unquote sass
Mm-hmm.
until this whoever gave them legs to allow them to be sassy like that. I remember feeling jealous. Like when I first saw Duolingo, like, oh, it would have been so fun to be supported in that and be able to have fun with it. And I think with understanding that, like, we as consumers, when we want to find a brand that we want to get behind, we want to relate to them. We want it to feel real and genuine. So whenever love what I'm seeing on with brands getting that leeway, I also feel like on the corporate end of things, depending on the business you're working for, everyone's heart is going to talk about like hard cents and numbers, and like, if it went viral, so what did that do for us? And part of what I end up teaching with a lot of my clients is that we have to think about the whole experience. Is like, if something goes viral, where do they land next? Where do we hope they want to spend time with us? If they get to know us right then and there, where do we want them to experience it? So I would say corporate end of things, it was literally like helping. I want to say it a little bit louder. A lot of men to help me like listen in to how like this branding can be what makes people choose us no matter our price is over somebody else.
Yeah. I think, that's so true. And it's interesting because in my coaching business, I built most of my business off of social platforms, right? I would say,
Yeah.
95+% of my clients come from social platforms. And I used to think, and I used to tell my husband, I'm like, well, nobody wants to go on Instagram for career advice, right? Like maybe LinkedIn, but nobody wants Instagram. And Instagram is like 80% of my sales. Like that's where I reach a majority of my clients, including CEOs and CFOs who are like following on Instagram, which is bizarre. And so I think social media has become so key, especially post-COVID, especially like in the most recent years, but even 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it's how we're getting our information. And so I love that you're trying to communicate like, hey, there's an emotion here. This is important. This is going to help people feel that like affiliation and like resonance with our brand in a way we can't communicate just on our website or through like the pictures we take of our products. So it's amazing the work that you were doing and that you continue to do now for your clients within your coaching business. I also want to touch on what it felt like to be laid off, because right now the job market is really tough. There are a lot of companies doing layoffs. It's hitting people really hard. I'd love to hear for you. What was that journey like mentally, emotionally, both like in the moment during when you were experiencing it, but then also after, once you left, what did you have to do to kind of rebuild yourself in the right way?
I will tell you that I took it really hard. Even as I was just mentioning, like trying to really prove myself over and over again. Like there was it was really difficult. I was a team of one and then sometimes an intern, and hitting goals. I would, when they would give me a traffic goal or a sales goal, I would be like, all right, how do I 2x that? How do I 3x that? And that contributed to the amount of like how much I was like in people, like talking to email marketing, working with sales team. And like, I really like, I wanted to prove social media. I had a kind of like this prove myself. And unfortunately at that time I was proving my self-worth within my job, which is something I would heavily tell you not to do, just because you're doing a skill, you're meeting people, but it has nothing to do with your self-worth. But me being a recovering A+ student, people pleaser from the Midwest, like it lined up. It was going to happen that way a little bit. And I would just have, I would come into meetings with reports, and I would just really like, I just want to kind of hit home. I was really trying to prove that I was making the company better. I was showing my work essentially. And at the time we were trying to build up like travel gadgets. It was a whole separate part of the business. And like I said, we were in the middle of this photo shoot that I had helped orchestrate with PR teams and doing a gift guide. And it was everything in between. And I'd asked for a raise about 2 weeks before. And at the time they were like, we know that you're hitting your goals, but that's your job. This is what your job is, to hit goals. And I'm like, I'm a one person team and I'm tripling. It was like a lot of heaviness. And at the time I was a little frustrated, where I talked to my manager going, that I've made a big difference. And it was her trying to keep the manager above her happy. And it was just a lot of mix. And I will say that the more I got bolder, the manager above her did not love that. Like it was not he mostly just wanted me to do the work and not try to talk through these things. So when I was in the middle of the shoot, they asked me to come into the room. Oh my gosh. And when you get into a layoff room, I'm sure people know this, like, you know what's about to happen. But I had someone in HR I've never spoken to, and then my manager next to us, they ended up telling me they didn't have any good reason. They were saying, we're just getting started on these things. And I felt so betrayed. I felt like absolutely just like worthless. Like I clearly wasn't as good as I thought I was supposed to be. And it was, I didn't cry yet, which I feel pretty strong about, but my manager at the time wanted a hug. Like, oh, like, I feel so bad. Will you hug me? And I remember just
Thank you.
like wanting so badly to like if I didn't have to filter myself, I'd say so much right now. And I will say the layoff experience was atrocious. And I know now even more that it wasn't good. A lot of the people that depended on me knew something happened. Like I left that day. But what was helpful was that at the time, somebody on a sales team in a completely different brand under this brand was there. And she was like, what's wrong? Wait, what's happening? And then she's like, oh, I'm taking you to lunch, because it was still the morning at the time. And we had drinks at lunch. And she more or less was like, I've been laid off 4 times. It has nothing to do with me. It has nothing to do with your performance. Like you and I both know the frustrations with the brand. So it was like having this person tell me that like, I'm absolutely worthy. And like, this is just like, unfortunately at the time I was realizing I could never prove myself. Like it was just, at least in this particular environment, I wasn't going to be heard. And I think that was something that I kind of took home with me of understanding that I was giving so much of my autonomy about how I felt about myself away to this business, this brand that I loved, but also like I wasn't getting it reciprocated. It was definitely really hard, for sure.
I appreciate you sharing all of that. I think so many people probably are listening and resonating with this story. And there's a few things, because I tend to be more tactical. There's a few things in here I want to touch on. So the first is your manager's reaction. Like, oh, I feel so bad. Give me a hug. If you are a manager, don't do that. Don't do that. They don't want to hug you, right? And something I coach managers a lot if they're letting go of their employees is like, don't get emotional. It doesn't do them any good to know that you feel bad about it. It just makes them feel worse about what's happening. Like, that's not necessary. You're not doing them any favors. I always think of, I don't know if you've seen the scene of Moneyball with Brad Pitt, where he's like,
I haven't watched though. But you're giving me a teaser of why I should watch this movie on Netflix.
He's a traded player, and he's like, unfortunately, you've been traded to the Tigers. Here's the HR person who's going to get you situated. You can get your stuff out of your locker by the end of the day. Appreciated having you on the team. And he gets up and he walks out. That's his letting go. And at the time, the guy is so upset And the coworkers were like, that was a brutal way to do that. You didn't give him any information. You didn't talk to him. He's like, it's not going to help him and it's not going to change the outcome. You're doing him a disservice if you basically like play to his emotions. And I think that's so true. And I think it's hard on the receiving end of that, but it's much harder if you're on the receiving end of somebody who's like, let's hug it out. And you're like, no, thanks. I'd like to run as far as I can right now. So I think that's one big takeaway. If you are a manager or if you are laid off and your manager is unemotional, they're probably doing it to protect you, not because they don't like you or they don't care about you or they don't want you to be successful. It's just, it's a no-win situation. The second thing is that when you are laid off, so many of us have our identity in our title. So many that we think like saying that we're the director of tech is like such a big part of who we are as a person, or we're the head of social media marketing and it's who we are. And I'll say it's something I've struggled with. I think a lot of high performing type A individuals, we struggle with like separating that identity from that title, or even from like a monetary compensation or whatever it is. And in the end, they're not attacking you, right? They're trying to make a business decision. It's not in your favor, but trying to separate that from yourself, I think is so important. Whether you have that friend who will go get, day drinks with you and empathize and make you feel a little bit better, or even if it's taking time, something I have a lot of clients do when they get laid off is like, I want you to write down 10 things you're great at work. Write it down on a piece of paper. Those 10 things have not changed just because you were laid off. You're still great at them. And you can still feel good in that performance, but it's hard, right? We just want to be sad. So also give yourself some time, some grace to just like be mad about it. That's cool too. I wouldn't take to social media with your madness. Maybe keep that inside, small group of friends.
At least process it for a little while before you're ready for it. Like I will say I like, even though I've been doing my own business for 7 years now, it wasn't until about last year I decided I wanted to share my layoff story, because I was like, I think I need to make this feel right to me before I share about it. And even part of it, some people will talk about, oh yeah, I was laid off and this is how I can help you because I was laid off. And I was like, I need this to feel right for me before I can say like, okay, this is something you can know about me. And I think I don't want that to seem like anyone who did get laid off that you're not allowed to share it. It was just more about like, let this be your experience on your own time. Because for me, that happened at the exact right time. I was ready to share it. So
yeah. And that's so powerful too. It's okay if you want to talk about it. It's okay if you don't want to talk about it. It's okay if you need some time. It's okay if you don't need any time, right? Like your reaction is your own. But just make sure you're comfortable with it. I personally would not go get lunch, day drinks, and then take to social media with how you're feeling in that moment. Like maybe give yourself.
I didn't go on social at all. It was the
maybe we give ourselves some carbs. Maybe we take some time. Like just word to the wise. And I think Jamie, the way that you handled it is so great, right? Like I'm going to take this time. I'm going to connect with somebody I know I can trust. I'm going to get comfortable with who I am and separate that from my identity and build something that I'm really proud of. I think it's such a great outcome. I think one other thing that you touched on that I'd love to hear more about from you is you talked about when so much of your identity is in your work, right? I am my role. I am 3x my outcome goals that I've been assigned. What advice do you have for people who are managing that really high workload? Those type A overachievers who like are taking too much on their plate. They're trying to do all the things and they're trying to do it at 300% efficiency. Like how would you help and coach those individuals?
It's a hard question for the fact there's many answers, but there's also, I'm trying to remember how I felt when I had that, like when it was so a part of my identity. Like if like somebody comes up and says like set boundaries, I would probably like give them like a weird look, like I try. What are you talking about? Like, it was like, you're like so in it, like that. I remember that feeling. But I think part of, one thing that has helped, or even now, sometimes when I'm trying to make sure I'm like really grounded in like what I want my experience in life to be, is it being asked the question, like, tell me who you are and don't mention what you do. And I that question always feels so triggering in the right ways. I think triggering in a good way, whereas like, who am I without the work that I do? Who am I without these things? And for me, I think back then it would have been, I don't know. I wasn't sure. And part of what I love and enjoy about the kind of clients I work with now is that whenever they do leave corporate, we are kind of reconstructing who they are through the brands they're creating. Sometimes we kind of are doing a goal of what type of person they want to be, and they challenge themselves in small ways to be a little bit rebellious and, share their opinions like on the which they think is outrageous, but it's pretty simple for the internet. Like it's like little things, and just like finding themselves of like, if you had to choose like how your life kind of plays out, like what do you want to represent? And that side of like my type A-ness back then would have been productivity and achieving and like indispensable. Like those would be the words that I would have probably come up with because it would make sense. And where now it's like, I want to be curious. I want to lead by example. I want people to feel cared for. And I want to just say it takes a while, but having that initial kind of trigger point of like, do you know who you are outside of your job? And if you don't, there's nothing wrong with that. You've been trained, because I was trained to think that I am my job. This is step one. This is step one of like, where are we headed? What's the direction? And maybe it could affect everything else in your work and what you do.
Jamie, that's such good advice. I'm hoping that everyone is listening is like, okay, who am I? Not what is my title? How do I start to think about this? Maybe put some bullet points down, some word mind mapping. I think that's such a powerful exercise. I think it's hard for a lot of us who do get so wrapped up in what we're doing instead of like who we are as an individual. I'd also love to spend some time hearing about when you have these clients, they've left corporate, they're building their businesses, or maybe they're still in corporate and they're building a side hustle and you're working on this branding, right? You had talked about building their personal brands, their company brands. You said sometimes it's a little bit of a reach, a stretch from who they've been historical. What does that look like to build a true brand for yourself, whether it's for your business or for your career?
I mean, it goes back to what I was saying is identifying like what kind of energy in general do you want to represent, no matter if you're in corporate or if you're like starting your own business. I think, when somebody talks about building a brand, they want to talk about your ideal client, and that makes sense. It's really important. But the other end of the spectrum is how, like, if someone was to seek you out for support, what would you like them to come to you for? And we'll do this on a deep dive of someone's experience in life. Like, what was the key moments that allowed you to make the shifts that you're doing? What made you decide that this is the line of work you wanted to do? If you can remember, like, if someone comes up with names, like, for instance, like when I talk about being a curious person, like I will go all the way back to remembering when I would find myself inside my like step grandpa's like candy jars and like talk about like this natural, what naturally came to me, and like kind of like finding your roots of who you are outside of the business. And I think for me, this helps a lot when I'm helping a brand who's got a team of people. So if they're talking on social media, I go, oh, okay. A great example of this is a protein bar company called Perfect Bar. And now I'm gonna like look forward to having a Perfect Bar. Anyway, they will have each of their teammates say what their favorite like flavor is. I would wait for one of their team members every week, because I trusted her for the fact that I liked how she dressed, I liked the way she talked, I liked the way, like, in general, she was not somebody who was like, oh, the chocolate one because it's fine. But it was like, she would be like, I am bringing this on a hike, and I am going on this is my favorite one when I'm traveling in the airport, or this is one that like sometimes like I act as if it's really cookie dough. Like it was, you could just get the vibe of that. Like she was real. There's a genuineness to her, but also like what her day to day was kind of like, what it felt like to be getting coffee across the table from her. So in my world, that's super magnetic as a brand, because people see the humanness behind you and understand that they can actually have a conversation. And I think in the corporate world, these are essentially soft skills. Like how can you lean into how you want people to want to work with you, how you want people to seek you out when they have a big project because of your energy, not just because of the skills you have.
Yeah. So many good things that you just touched on them. Like, oh, we could make like whole other episodes to talk about them. But I think it is so true. It's interesting. I just spent a bunch of time with a bunch of coaches, and we were all talking about our businesses, and something that they kept encouraging me to do was like, why don't you share more of your life? Like you post so much corporate content and it's great, but like nobody knows anything about you. And you have like interesting things about you that you could be sharing that would be so much more relatable and so much easier to connect to. And one of my co-coaches gave the example of like, do you ever watch people on TikTok make ice? They like pour ice in these little molds and they freeze it and they make these fancy drinks. She's like, I'm never going to make ice, but I watch all these ice videos. I'm like, ooh, that's a very pretty ice that somebody has made. It's like getting that insight into somebody else's life and passions. And so I think it's so key in the corporate world, in your business, to build that relatability, to build that connection so that people know who you are and not just what your title is, what is your personal brand. So I think these are great takeaways. If we were to summarize this episode into one big parting word takeaway for listeners, Jamie, what was it that you would say like, hey, go do this tomorrow and I swear your life will change for the better?
I feel like we got to go back to the question and really understand who you are. Who are you if you can't say your title or you can't say your skills? Do it as a journal prompt. Leave it to that at least. But then within that, think about some of the stories that helped you become who you are. Like think about like anything from childhood. Just let your subconscious, your conscious brain help you out. And within that, just write down 3 adjectives: curiosity, confidence, whatever's the right terms for you, and allow them to almost be like your motivators in the morning. Today, how can I feel a little more confident? That's outside of work. Like maybe that's what you wear in the day. Maybe that's what you share with your colleagues. But the main thing is it can just become almost like the energy you want to manifest as a leader.
Love that. So Jamie, if people are listening to this episode and they're having as much of a wonderful time as I am chatting with you, where can they find you? Where can they go to get connected with you?
Well, you can always find me over on my podcast, Limitless, with Jamie Ratterman. I even too, for anybody who's laid off, I did a whole episode. It was therapy for me. So feel free to listen to that one. I'll give you a link, just to, if you're wanting to kind of think about what your personal brand is, I'll go ahead and drop that over to you. And then of course you can find me over on socials, at Jamie Ratterman. So that's pretty much every social channel. I've got that name, but Instagram is the place to come and say hi.
That's awesome. We'll definitely be checking it out. Thank you so much, Jamie, for coming on the podcast. If you listened to this and you absolutely loved it, which I know that you did, make sure that you drop a 5-star review, put any of your questions or comments below so that we can get back to you. Otherwise, make sure you tune in next week for another great episode. Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you.